Hello, everyone. I'm Joe Castello for Competition Plus Audio, and today we've got a special opportunity. He just got his NHRA Pro Stock license back after 15 years on the sidelines. He's a 1990 U.S. Nationals champion, and he joins us now, Jerry Eckman. Jerry, welcome back to NHRA Drag Racing. How are you?
I'm fine, Joe. Thank you very much. Good to be on here.
I got to say, Jerry, I grew up watching you race. Those years that you were winning and dominating were, I would call them, my formative years in drag racing, where I was a high school kid. I was like 16 to 20 in that range when you were out there battling it out against the Johnsons and everybody and Bob Glidden, and we're running a Pontiac, and I'm a Pontiac guy, so I followed your career big time, and I got to say, I'm happy to have you on the show.
Well, I'm certainly happy to be here, Joe.
Now
I'm excited about being here.
Let's talk about your licensing, and then we'll get into the whole story. For, believe it or not, there's a lot of drag racing fans that have come up through and have heard your name, but not the story. But first of all, how did it feel to go 668 and 669 at over 205 miles per hour?
It was incredible, Joe. It was incredible. A fan came up to me while I was there getting ready for my licensing runs, and he said to me, "It's good to see you back." And he said, "The cars feel fast." And I said, "Oh my goodness." He said, "Well, I just stick with my 990 car. That probably feels slow to you." And I thought about that for a minute, and I said, "No, it wouldn't. The fastest car I've been in is my Ford Explorer. Haven't been in a race car in 15 years, so that 990 car would feel very fast to me." So you can imagine what this Pro Stock's going to feel like.
That had to be tough, Jerry, loving something like drag racing and not being able to participate while the world kind of moves on and you were unable to participate.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I kept I went through a real depressed time because that's all I had done all my life. And I always tried to represent Pennzoil in an honorable way. I had a very honorable career with Pennzoil. And I decided I'm just going to go back and work with the teams and be a part of it in my own way. And I've had a great time, met a lot of nice people, and worked for a lot of nice teams. So that was the only thing I could do at the time, and I just stayed with it.
And I think the way this is going to go is we're going to end up working backwards for a lot of our listeners out there, in that you have been reinstated and found out this year that you would be reinstated. But I'm sure people are wondering, well, why was he not instated in the first place, which we will get to. But let's go back to when you found out at Englishtown this year. Graham Light calls you for a meeting. You've been out helping the teams, obviously wanting to drive a Pro Stock car, unable to, and Graham basically informed you that you would be able to try to get your license once again.
Yes, that's true. I was at Englishtown, and it was after qualifying. I think it was on the Saturday after qualifying. I got a message from one of the NHRA officials that Graham Light wanted to meet with me at the safety safari trailer, and I thought there was possibly a safety infraction. I wasn't really sure what this was about at the time, and apparently some of my team members knew, but they wanted to let me be surprised. So I went over to the trailer, and Graham was there, and Bobby Bennett was there, and we went in together, and Graham sat down with me, and he talked with me, and he told me that he'd gone over the fine and the suspension with his staff, and they figured that the 15 years has been a long enough time that I've represented myself well with NHRA in the meantime and cooperated with everyone there, their officials, and have never said any bad words toward the NHRA, and thought that I was a gentleman and thanked me for being that way, and he was going to reinstate me to my driving status again, which I was overwhelmed and in tears.
That's what I heard. I heard that it was a joyous experience, and a lot of people that I know within the sport were very excited about that moment. I can only imagine how you felt having that lifted off of you. Yes,
it was a double-edged sword, Joe. I was so thrilled And then reality hit me. I thought, gee, 15 years has gone by where I haven't been able to drive. I know I've got the opportunity to now. Can I still do it? That crossed my mind. And but I got that out of my head as quickly as I could, because you got to have a positive attitude if you're going to apply yourself to something. But that came across my mind initially.
So during this period, Jerry, were you always thinking about driving? Were you dreaming of driving? We often talk about the passion of racing and why people are doing this. It's so much work. It's so hard, chasing money. And it's all about the experience from starting line to finish line. It may only be 6 or 7 seconds, but it is a rush that it's obvious you can't really get anywhere else. And you showing up at the racetrack, I can understand other people might have just kind of thrown their hands in the air and taken up ATVing in the wilderness or some other hobby like fishing. Instead, you continued to come to the drag strip.
Absolutely. Well, I grew up in Southern California in the 50s. I was a teenager, and hot rodding was kind of in its infancy there, and I kind of grew up with it. And that was all that was ever on my mind. And I just pursued it, and I was like most guys with a passion. They just pursue it till they reached the goal. And I was very, very blessed to move that far in the ranks and get a major sponsor and have a successful career. And it's constantly reinforcing you when you do well, and you just want to keep going. And it's a passion. It has to be a passion, because like you say, there's a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of expense, a lot of people involved, and everyone has to be doing their job. It's a big responsibility, but everyone enjoys the win. And I guess that's what makes it worthwhile. It keeps you coming back.
Tell me about how you got started back in 1980. I think that some people maybe don't realize, and maybe it's not like this anymore. You tell me, but you guys were regional racers, and the NHRA tour would come around as it makes its swing across the country, and you'd be able to go to the events that were in your region, and you would qualify and do well, and you ran more, and then eventually ended up on the tour when you got a major sponsor. But initially, you guys were just sharp mechanics who could hang with the touring professionals.
Absolutely. And I've talked to a lot of the professionals, and usually most of them were some kind of a standout at their local track, so they had some potential, and that's the way I was. And we had a partner named Bill Orndorff, and he had an appliance business, and he was a passionate racer himself, and he wanted me to drive, and we kind of went together as a team, and we did the regional races. I built the engines in my garage, and we towed off to the races, and we weren't real successful right away, but we weren't failures either. We qualified at a lot of the races, and of course the money issue was tough. I had a full-time job in the oil field, and he was running his business, but the passion was so much that we'd always make time for those races, and the money would hold out long enough and we could get to another one. And some of the touring pros, as you call them, they started taking note of us because we were running pretty well, and we were upsetting a lot of people as far as winning rounds against a lot of the top name people, and that's such a positive reinforcement for our team to be able to do that, and that certainly keeps you motivated.
Now, you say the name Orndorff. A lot of our listeners say, hey, any relation to the wrestler, Mr. Wonderful?
No relation, but we did meet him at Atlanta one year.
Very, very cool. So as your team is getting better, and obviously at that time in the 80s, NHRA was growing like gangbusters, and the pro stock wars that were going on between Bob Glidden and in the early part of the decade, Lee Shepard and Raren Morrison, Frank Iaconio, obviously the Johnsons, Butch Leal, California Flash, like pro stock, not that it isn't now, it obviously still is, but that was like the golden era of pro stock.
Absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly. And to be even mentioned in that group at that time, was certainly an honor. And but it was an honor, but you had to earn it. And I'm not being I'm not bragging or anything, but we were doing pretty well, and we started catching their eye, so to speak. And like I said earlier, it reinforced our team, and we kept going and plugging away. And in 1985, we had just about exhausted all our funds. And while we were out at the Spring Nationals in 1985, we sold everything, truck, trailer, engines, car, transmissions, everything, to Stan Mizell from Florida, and we flew home. And we were going to stop because we thought we couldn't afford it. And I was home for a couple of weeks, and Bill called me and said, "How you doing?" I said, "Oh, it's terrible. I feel like I'm lost." He said, "Let's try it one more time." So we ordered another car, and it was ready at Pomona, and we went out and qualified fifth. So we got the bug again, and we just couldn't stop. And we went on like that for a couple of years. No, that was in 86, first part of 86. Then in 87, we started looking for some sponsors, doing some serious work looking for sponsors. And my brother was sending out resumes to different sponsors, and he'd get negative letters back, but you'd have a name and a phone number, and Pennzoil happened to be one of them. And this is a story in itself. The name as the race director of Pennzoil was Dean Tate at the time. And I thought, gee, I knew a Dean Tate. I used to race with him in Orange County years ago when we were younger. So I thought it's probably not the same guy, but I called and it was. So he talked to me and he said that, Pennzoil had been affiliated with race cars with Rick Mears. They spent a lot of money, and it was a successful campaign with Rick Mears, and they had been out of it for a while, but they were thinking about getting back into it with race cars as far as sponsorship goes. And they were going to go to the Summer Nationals at Englishtown, New Jersey. And I told them to come by and see me and visit and what have you. And I ended up winning the race. So how's that for timing?
Good timing.
Good timing. So a week later, they were at my house in Ventura, California, and we signed the contract for 3 years. And it just blossomed from there, and that lasted from 87 through 96. So we had a wonderful, wonderful career, and a lot of racing, fun, a lot of wins with Pennzoil.
And I remember, just as a fan, when you rolled out that Pennzoil car, it seemed like you guys took a major step forward. I can imagine what funding like that would do. And you go on to win the 1990 U.S. Nationals. Ran Larry Morgan in the final, just for everyone out there. Joe Motto won Top Fuel, Ed the Ace in Funny Car, Dave Schultz in Pro Stock Motorcycle, and Jerry Eckman in Pro Stock. That must have been quite a day.
It was quite a day. It was quite a day. I'll never forget that final. That was a close race. Larry was out running me a little bit, and we thought, well, we'll change engines in the final. And if you viewed our camp, you'd have seen we had an engine on the hoist. The engine car was sitting there with no engine or trans or bell housing in it, and looked over, and Larry was all ready to go. And we dropped the engine in and raced him, and I ran the same as him and left on him just a little bit. Got the win. I think it was 3,000 something very close. And it was very exciting for me and my team because they'd worked so hard. And it's a win you never forget. And it's a special trophy on my showcase.
Once you win the U.S. Nationals, you are forever enshrined, regardless of class or category. Now, Jerry, let's fast forward to the mid-'90s. Pennzoil is winding up with you guys. Obviously, you want to keep going. The economic situation, it's just sometimes, you mentioned it was luck in a way that you're able to bring on a big sponsor like that, and sometimes you have the luck and sometimes you don't. And 1997 is obviously when things went down. Talk about leading up to the Pontiac Excitement Nationals at National Trail Raceway in Columbus, Ohio. You were coming off a DNQ at Englishtown once again, but how was that season going for you at the time?
Well, it wasn't going too bad, but when we lost the Pennzoil deal over the winter of 96, Bill didn't want to do any dynoing. He didn't want to spend any money because our funding was low now. So we didn't do much testing. We had our good engine that from the previous year. We just put the wraps on it and left it set. And we started out at the beginning of the year with Checker, Shucks, and Craig, and we had tried to get a sponsor. And we didn't get a lot of money, but it was in the beginning. So the first part of the year started out pretty good until we broke that engine and hurt it bad, and we were scrambling parts. And I remember going upstairs looking for the best cracked pistons, and things like that to get the car to qualify with the cheapest way we could. And I think I believe it was Topeka. I may be mistaken, but we qualified 13th there, and I was tickled to death that we qualified 13th. Bill was upset because we were used to running up top, and we were just out of funds, and we went to Englishtown, like you say, and didn't qualify. We ran in the Big Butt Shootout, I think it was in those days. They had that there, too. And I lost there, and we didn't qualify, and it was just a humbling day. And we were coming back, and Bill said, well, the next race is our home race now, which would have been the Spring Nationals there in Columbus. And I think there was a 2-week layover, and he invited some guy down to the shop, and we had salesmen come in all the time, and he introduced me to the guy, and him and Bill went in the office, and they talked, and the guy left, and Bill asked me what I thought of the guy. Well, I really didn't know who he represented. He introduced me as his name, and he said, oh, he's with nitrous oxide. I thought, oh boy. And then Bill and I got into it over that. He told me he wouldn't do it, and I have to take the blame as well, because I didn't want to do it, but I had been friends with Bill since I hired him as a paper boy. That's how long I'd known him when I came back from Vietnam. And him and I raced Southern California all together when we were younger, and he's just been part of this. And when we got into the Pennzoil thing, we moved from California. All my family's still there, and I made a big move, built a shop here, got going into then when our sponsorship ran out, here we were. So he took that thing from Checker, Shucks, Craig, which was about a tenth of what we had from Pennzoil. And the budget, he thought we'd pick up more, and we didn't. So he got desperate, is what it amounts to. He didn't want to do bad at his new home track. And I fought him tooth and nail on it, and he told me, he called one of our competitors, Mike Thomas, who was also had his shop here in Ohio, and I knew the engine builder, Jimmy Oliver, and he said he'd try to help me. And so I went over there for the 2-week period, and I was working over there. We were trying to get an engine going, and in the meantime, we had the one that didn't qualify in the car, and Bill was working on the nitrous part of this thing. And I'm not going to play dumb that I didn't know he was doing it, but he told me he wouldn't. And when I got to the track on qualifying day on that Friday, I had just got off the dyno over at Mike Thomas's shop, and we were going to bring the engine out that afternoon. And when I got there, the car was already in the pits with the other engine in it. And when I fired it up, the bottle exploded.
Let's pause right there, Jerry, because I think it's important to lay down some context for the listeners out there who are younger and maybe draw a parallel to something that maybe they understand, maybe they don't. In Major League Baseball right now, we have just gone through an era where people are using performance enhancers of various kinds, and there's been a big debate about them, and I really think that it parallels what we saw in drag racing at the time on this level, and I want you to give me your opinion, which is once you see it and you know it's happening and it is out there, and even if you are not doing it and you see others that may be doing it, it does increase the pressure to do it. And we've heard of baseball players who are on the cusp, and maybe they're just barely good enough to be in the major leagues, and maybe they lose a job because some other guy is using something. And it almost encourages everyone who is right on the cusp, perhaps desperate, like you said, to do something they wouldn't normally do. Do you think that's what was going on during that period in the mid-'90s?
Absolutely, absolutely. Without bringing other team names into it, we know there was that those infractions were going on. We knew that, and all the other racers knew it. I don't know why it wasn't stopped, but it wasn't. And like you say, when we got on the ropes, and it was certainly a terrible decision to make, because I had told Bill, if something ever happens here, they'll always remember Jerry Eckman, but they'll never remember you, Bill Orndorff. And that certainly came to pass. And when that bottle exploded, and I think NHRA was under a lot of pressure at that time. So when that bottle exploded and it blew the oil tank off, we hadn't qualified or even ran the car like that, but it blew up in the pits nonetheless. And the officials came over right away and seized the car and took the car to tear down. And we were banned from competing at that event until their investigation. And then after that, we got a letter in the mail that we received a 2-year suspension, a $25,000 fine from the NHRA for that infraction. So, and I have to, like I say, I had a choice to walk away when I knew what was lurking. I had that choice. And life is about choices, and I made the wrong choice to go out there and fire that engine up. And so I have to take my responsibility for what I've done. And I did. I took my 2-year suspension. I had no work for 2 years. Couldn't compete or do anything with NHRA for 2 years. So I had a little savings, and I had to live on that for a couple of years. And by the time my suspension was up, I had about $13,000 left in the bank. And a guy asked me if I would drive for him, that he would finish paying my fine, $1,000 a month for 12 months, and we flew out to California, and I brought the $13,000 and gave it to the NHRA, and they made a deal that we could, they would let me get relicensed for the new year in 99? Must have been 99. No, it was 2000, for the new year in 2000. And so I gave them the $13,000, and I had waited out the 2 years, and they were going to give me my license, and the new owner was going to pay the $1,000 a month for the next 12 months over the 2000 year period. And over the winter, he changed his mind, sold the car, and bought a boat. So now I still owed NHRA $12,000. So it was tough on me, and I'm not making any excuses. I had a chance to walk away, but I don't know if anyone would have been in my position that moved out of their home state, all their families there, came out here to race, and all of a sudden you want to walk away from it. And like you say, it's like the performance-enhancing drugs people were using. It's almost an incentive to follow in that footsteps, but you know it's wrong. And I admit it, and I know it was a poor decision, and I've paid the price for it over the last 15 years.
Now, for people who are wondering, well, why didn't he just pay the $25,000? I don't know that it's common knowledge. It was because of lack of funds. Not everybody out there has that kind of cash to just lay down on the table.
Well, that's true. I sat out of work for 2 years and lived on the savings. And then when the 2-year suspension was up, I was going to go back to work racing and driving, and I had to take the last bit of money and give it to as part of the fine. And then I was out of money and hadn't got the job yet either. So it was really tough on me then. But like I say, I look back on it now, and I had choices to make, and I made the wrong choice, and I take full responsibility for it, and for my part. And I certainly, encourage anybody that's thinking about anything that goes over the rules, any infractions that may go over the edge, to think twice, because I'm a good example of what can happen. So, and it kind of tarnished everything I did in the past in my eyes. But yet, I still had a big fan following. I had a lot of supporters who stood behind me, and that encouraged me to just go back to work with the race teams and help out and use some of my knowledge and experience to help the other teams. And that's what I've been doing for the last 13 years.
Jerry, tell me about obviously, after this all happened, you had to be a little bit wayward in that you had built your entire life around drag racing, and now you cannot, it's not that you can't afford it, you cannot be there at a race like that, and it had to be very difficult. But I've also read some stories about even in a bar, so to speak, where you think you're there just watching some sports on TV or something. Next thing you know, you're reintroduced to this problem that came to define you. Yeah,
absolutely. Just to go back a little bit, when it first happened, actually, I was disgraced in town. Even a lot of the people that were so-called friends, they walked away, and I'd go in to buy a Coke, and I thought they ran you out of town. I'd hear that. And after the 2 years suspension was out, I heard a lot of that during that. And I was working for one of the teams out of Pennsylvania, Kenny Koretsky, and we were sitting in a sports bar after qualifying, and this is years after that incident, probably sometime in 2002 or possibly 3. It was just ironic. After the qualifying, a lot of the racers near the hotel there were at the sports bar, and they had a sports trivia. You know how some of those sports bars have these trivia games. And some was about football, some was about baseball, but since the NHRA was in town and the race was going on, they threw in a couple sports trivia from the NHRA. And I'm sitting there eating dinner, and one of the questions was, who was suspended, who got the biggest fine and suspension for a nitrous infraction in 1997. Oh, my gosh, it was so embarrassing. And then half the guys, and of course everybody that I raced with knew, and they all pointed to me at my table. That was a very low moment in my life.
That I can't even imagine what that must have felt like, Jerry. And and still, though, everything happens. It makes you stronger if it doesn't kill you. And here we are. You have just completed relicensing. You've been over 205 miles per hour. You're pulling gears on a pro stock car once again, and have come full circle. It's got to feel pretty darn good to be back behind the wheel of a pro stocker.
I feel like the most blessed man in the world. I know a lot of kids that have always dreamed about being a professional racer, and I had a very good professional career. And at the end of the career, it was kind of sad as to how it ended. And now I'm here at 70 years old, and my boss, who I've worked for now, comes up to me at Norwalk, and he said, Jerry, what are you doing next weekend? I said, I got to finish painting some trim out of my house and probably mow the yard. He said, no, you're not. You're going out here and test and get licensed and run this car. Now, what kind of a man would do that? What kind of a blessing is that? Not only to race once in my career, the career I had, and now it's starting over. I feel like the fastest 70-year-old man in the neighborhood. Well, I probably am.
Now, Jerry, where does this story go from here? Because if I'm a Hollywood feature film writer, I'm thinking to myself, all this really needs is the big finish, and this is winning Academy Awards, the life that you have lived. What would you like to do now that you've got this very difficult period behind you? You've come full circle. You've gone back down the quarter mile again. You've broken into the sixes, 200 miles per hour. You have relicensed. Where would you like to see this thing go from here?
Well, I certainly am going to be loyal to my team who set this up for me. I have so many people to thank. I have Bobby Bennett, who's been a big advocate for me and certainly a lobbyist on my behalf to NHRA. I can't thank him enough. I don't think this would have ever come to pass. And I certainly have to thank the NHRA, Graham Light and his staff, for reinstating me to start with. And then, last but not least, my team I worked for, who all secretly voted for me to get licensed. How can I thank them enough? And the fans that have stood behind me all these years. And right now, I don't know where it's going, Joe, but this is the new beginning. And I'm a licensed pro stock driver, and my boss, Steve Kent, and Roger Brogdon, they have business, and they don't get a lot of time away to do the testing. It's hard enough for them to compete on the 24-race circuit. So if they're going to designate me as the tester when they can't attend, I'd be tickled to death with that. Plus, I'll get some more seat time. And if it goes any farther, that's the icing on the cake. I don't know at this point. I'm not expecting too much, but it was an absolute most wonderful thing in my life to hop back in that pro stock car and let the clutch out. And I'm telling you, and to be licensed and to be available to race.
It's got to feel great. Jerry, I want to thank you for taking the time with us here today. I also want to thank you for your service in Vietnam for our country. That is very important, and it's something we didn't get into too much, but you mentioned it, and it is important that I thank you for that. Your career was one, again, as I developed as a drag racing fan. Jerry Eckman was always there. My first Gator Nationals was in 1980. Obviously, we love the sport together, all of us who follow the NHRA and drag racing in general, and certainly understand what it means. I can't imagine what it means to someone who has actually experienced the thrill of winning a U.S. Nationals. But for you to go through this, people make mistakes, own up to the mistakes, and become a better person for it, and come around and have this actually happen to you where you are reinstated. I think it's a great story for everyone. I think NHRA made a great call doing it, Graham Light and everyone involved. And I just want to thank you for coming on the show, sharing your story. I'm sure there are a lot of people that are going to learn a lot of lessons from this and will be able to apply it to their own lives. And all I can say is that I hope whatever you're looking for certainly happens. And I can't think of a better way than to see you back on the racetrack at an NHRA national event.
Well, thank you very much, Joe. And certainly I'd like to be back out on the racetrack, but I don't want to count my chickens before they hatch. I got to crawl before I walk. I got reinstated. I've driven the car. It felt awesome. I had 2 full runs to make yesterday. I ran a 668 and then a 669, within 4 thousandths of each other. So I must still have it a little bit. So I was kind of proud of myself and happy at the same time. And most of all, grateful for everyone who's helped me.
What was the quickest ET you ran previously, Jerry? What was the world record for Jerry Eckman prior to this test yesterday?
Well, I actually set the national record in 1992, and it was at 7:17. It was held by Warren Johnson. It was 7:18 at the time, and I ran 7:17. Set the national record. I don't know if I qualified number 1, but I won the race. And as that was in 92, and as the time progressed, I was one of the original members of the 6-second club. I think I was 7th in the 6-second club. And I went 6:90. I don't remember if it was 92 or 94. I ran a little faster than that in testing, but that didn't count. Officially, I think it was 92. It might have been 94.
Hey,
but that was about as fast as anybody was going. At 190, 99, a low 199. I never got into the 200-mile-an-hour club. And those 2 runs yesterday at 2:05 certainly got my attention. It felt terrific.
I can imagine. Jerry, it's been great catching up with you. Fans out there, this guy, he's been working behind the scenes on Roger Brogdon's car and Steve Kent, and is just a wealth of knowledge. And Jerry, thank you so much for taking the time and giving us some behind-the-scenes insight to what has happened here, and good things from now on. I certainly appreciate you coming on the show and spending time with us here on WFO Radio.
Well, I certainly am thrilled to be part of your radio show, and I thank you for having me on it, and it was a lot of fun talking with you, and it was a lot of fun talking the experiences, and I hope I send a good message out there to your fans.
I certainly think you do. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Joe.